So hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this inaugural event in the Research Assessment for Ethics, Data and AI discussion series. This innovative platform aims to advance discussions on the need for reform in research assessment practices and to foster critical dialogue within the academic and research community and beyond. This collaborative initiative brings together leading experts, scholars and practitioners through a series of engaging discussions and interactive sessions, empowering stakeholders with the knowledge and tools necessary to navigate the challenges of research assessment in the digital age. Today, our topic is research assessment in the digital environment. I am Catherine Bailey, Professor of Research Governance Partnerships at the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom and Operations Director at the Ethical Data Initiative, which is a collaboration between the Technical University of Munich and the University of Exeter. And I will be your moderator for today's discussion. So I'd like to tell you a little bit first about the institutions behind this series, who are all quite active in the research governance space. And we will send a follow-up email with more information, including how you can get involved after the event. So first of all, we have the Coalition for the Advancement of Research Assessment. The Coalition for Advancement of Research Assessment, or CoARA, has an interim secretariat composed of the European University Association, Science Europe and the European Commission, and it brings together a wide range of organisations involved and interested in research assessment. Its working group on ethics and research integrity policy in responsible research assessment for data and artificial intelligence, or ERIP for short, as that is quite a mouthful, focuses on integrating research ethics into digital research practices that use tools like data and AI. The main goals of the working group are to create policies, methods and tools that promote ethical and responsible research assessment in the context of data and artificial intelligence. The Committee on Data of the International Science Council has a working group called the a committee called the International Data Policy Committee, which is the key instrument by which CODATA pursues its mission of promoting effective and appropriate policies for open science and fair data. The mission of the EOSC-Future RDA Artificial Intelligence and Data Visitation Working Group, which is under the umbrella of the Research Data Alliance, is to contribute to building ethical, legal and social and technical frameworks for AI, while examining the potential of data visitation to bridge challenges for the sharing and reuse of data in the framework of open science. And the Ethical Data Initiative, which is jointly coordinated between the University of Exeter and the Technical University of Munich think tank. We are a non-partisan platform that fosters discussion on data ethics, informed significantly by philosophical, historical and social studies of science, with a focus on equity and engagement across different domains of data work for public interest. Before we get started today, I'd like to do a little housekeeping. This event is being recorded and it will be made available on YouTube and the Ethical Data Initiative website after the event. After this introduction, we will move to the main panel discussion and then a Q&A session. And during the Q&A session, we will try to answer as many of your questions as possible. So please use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions and participate, or to expand the debate. Please keep your microphone muted out of respect for the panelists, but we do encourage you to be as interactive as possible in that chat box. So if everybody is happy, I will quickly dive into today's topic. Like our panel with us today, I truly believe that research assessment reform is something that we all need to be paying much closer attention to, as research, and by extension the way it's assessed and governed, has the potential to affect all of us, from the products we consume to the way we conceptualize and interact with the world around us. The rise of digital technologies has transformed the research landscape, facilitating interdisciplinary collaboration and accelerating progress. But this shift also presents challenges, making the question of effective and ethical research assessment increasingly complex. It's clear that research assessment needs to be brought up to date in light of these challenges. So what are the potential solutions? How do we place value on digital or other non-traditional contributions to knowledge? How do we maintain research integrity? How do we structure and conduct assessment in this new environment? I'd like to introduce you to the panel of experts participating in today's debate. So if our panelists can start unmuting and turning their microphones on, I will proceed with a quick round of introductions before we begin our questions. So in no particular order, Professor Gitanjali Yadav is a senior scientist at the National Institute of Plant Genome Research in New Delhi and an adjunct professor of data science at the Institute of Science Education and Research in Bhopal. Specializing in genomics and structural bioinformatics, she focuses on food security and ecosystem conservation. Geeta is also a co-chair of the CoARA-ERIP working group. She helped establish the Cambridge India Research Foundation as the first recipient of the DBT Cambridge Lectureship. Professor Yadav has also received several awards, including the Hamid Fellowship, the Exceptional Talent Award from the Royal Society of London, and the Women's Excellence Award from India's Ministry of Science and Technology. Professor Evelyn Chiveyogawe is the Associate Dean at Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, UM6P, as it's more commonly known perhaps in Morocco. She is an expert in education, quality assurance, strategic planning and agriculture with 30 years of experience and over 100 publications to her name. Her transdisciplinary background and leadership in development cooperation initiatives across Africa, Europe, and the Asia-Pacific region enhance her work in building resilient education systems through responsible research and innovation. And Dr. Thandiwe Hara is the Regional Innovation and Research Policy Manager at the University of Oxford. She previously developed the Knowledge Exchange Department at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health and has extensive experience in strategy and policy in local government. Her doctoral research explored how large public institutions implement evidence-based health interventions. She focuses on strategies that promote the adoption and sustainability of research evidence, address health inequalities, and encourage socially inclusive economic growth. And we're particularly excited to have her here today because she's somewhat of an expert in equality, diversity, and inclusion, which is one of the big topics that we're going to address in today's conversation. So I would just like to say hello to our panelists and make sure that we are all online and comfortable before I begin with the first question in the discussion. And like I say, if you could please use that chat function to our audience, if you could please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to ask questions or participate in the debate, and we'll try and answer as many of your questions as possible. So on to the first question today. This is a question that we would like the audience and the panelists to consider as we go through the event today. And we'll return to it at the end of the event. But just keep this in mind as we're talking about the themes that come up today. So this is on behalf of the institutions involved. We would like your feedback. We would like you to let us know what your priorities are. The question is, what would be the two key research policy and technological outputs that you might like to see in the digital research space? So what would be the two key research policy and technological outputs you might like to see in the digital research space? So just keep that question in mind and we'll return to it at the end of the panel discussion. So what will now be the second question, I'd like to put first of all to Dr. Hara as our resident equality, diversity and inclusion expert. What are the key challenges that need to be addressed for research assessment given the digital transformation of research? Dr. Hara.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very, very important and up-and-coming topic. So sort of just looking back to time at which I was an undergraduate, which is a few years ago, you literally, and I did study in Malawi, which is a developing country, where you would go to the library and you'd probably have 1, 2, or 3 books to share across 50, 60 students. And at that time, that was, how research was packaged and what you sort of took as, knowledge, and where you found knowledge and what output it sort of represented. And, you would be interested to know that actually in most developing countries, probably that still has not changed very much, that we still do have quite a big disparity in terms of what outputs people are accessing. But actually, we are in 2025, and research has evolved and changed, and it's been transformed with digital technology. And, these days you have digital outputs, you have preprints, you have open access, people publish their work as blogs, you have open peer review, you have software as outputs of research. So very, very different forms of outputs from research, whereas traditionally these things have not been there. But the evolution of these things, which is giving us plenty of opportunity in terms of having increasing access to research and making sure that more and more people can have access. And like that example I just gave you, one book between 50 students, people can now, go on to Google, log and check on blogs and have access to all of this information. So this is really exciting in terms of making information accessible and democratic, and, sort of from one corner of the globe to the rest of the world, having access to the same information. But actually, we do actually have 2 challenges arising from this situation. The first one, for example, is that actually traditionally the way we assess research has not moved much, or at least has not kept up with how digital technologies have changed. So, we still respect general impact factors, we still respect citation counts, we still respect how many publications somebody have to their name. Even discipline, there's differences in disciplines in terms of what value is attached to them. However, the value that is attached to these outputs is not always the same as the importance of those outputs in that discipline. And then when I put on my EDI hat, you also do have huge disparities in who and what is actually publishing where, who is putting forward their research outputs in what format. So if you are an early career researcher, not connected, down in the global south, probably you might put your outputs more in terms of blogs and open reviews, because the rest of the other high impact journals might not be accessible to you. You may not know how to go about it. Your institution might not be as connected as the big institutions out there. And so immediately you're not sort of on a level playing field. But that means that it's not just you as a researcher, it also means that the ideas that you have, they may be excellent ideas, they're just locked away somewhere in a corner. And so people are not having access to all of them. So there's huge disparities in who publishes where, what is made visible. And so that is an area that we really need to think about. How can we use technology and the advancement that we have now in AI and all of those tools? How can we actually use those to make sure that actually research is assessed fairly? Research is assessed on the basis of how good it is, rather than on the basis of who's got access to what and who's living where. And there's also new forms of scholarship. You can do your literature review these days using AI and all of those fantastic tools. But actually, it might just be that because you're in the right place where you have access to that. If you are researching from Senegal, for example, you may not have the same access to these AI research tools as you would if you were in the UK or in India, or maybe even in the US. So what are we losing as a knowledge body by actually not paying attention to these disparities in terms of who's having access to what, but also how are they actually coming out? Now, these are obviously models that are fed by people as well. So what goes in is what comes out. Whose research is put in is also what research is put out in terms of what knowledge is available. So there's that systematic blacking out of information and outputs and researchers because of these disparities that exist. So digital visibility, whose research is being seen, how is it being seen, and why are we interpreting it, and how are we looking at it? And so there's also the issue of biases in these systems. You know, I mean, if there's ever a time where we need to have information democratized, correct information, this is it. We've been battling issues to do with disinformation, for example, vaccine disinformation, conspiracy theories, but that is a function of particular kinds of knowledge being made available to certain kinds of people at scale. But at the same time, we also have factual information, factual data, factual outputs that probably are locked away in a corner somewhere, but that hasn't got the same access to technology and tools as it would. And then obviously there's also the issue of AI. Is AI value free? You know, is it objective? Yes, and I think there is a huge opportunity for using AI in a very, very objective manner, but also at the same time, it may also be something that is possibly perpetuating or even deepening existing inequalities, because it is human fade. And so when people are designing these things, they'll design these things probably on the basis of the values that they already hold, and you know, the way they view the world, their worldview will be fed into these systems. So I would think that these are the challenges that are on the table. And that at the moment, we really need to be thinking about how do we have broader matrices of actually assessing these issues. How do we actually make sure that these models are transparent? You know, do we understand how these models are sort of, you know, supporting, and are we sure that actually they're not adding or even exacerbating existing inequalities? And so, you know, obviously there are sort of particular sort of frameworks, EDORA, for example, that would, you know, sort of recommend use of broader ways of looking at research and how we can assess it. But in a nutshell, those are the issues that I would sort of raise in terms of how do we reflect, and where do we need to change, and how do we need to change, and what do we really need to be thinking about before we get too excited about AI. But also those models do need to catch up with the evolution, as, you know, as AI evolves, the models we're creating and how we're assessing needs to catch up with that. And it's a catch-up factor. I think that probably is a big challenge, that, you know, if you're always playing catch-up, sometimes your solutions are coming in too late after a new problem has arisen. So I'll stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Thandiwe. There's some fantastic points in there, and I especially like the idea really that we all need to keep in mind while discussing this, of not perpetuating inequalities that have perhaps existed for decades, if not centuries, and thinking about this notion of really equality and how to include everybody in this question. I'd like to, if possible now, go to Evelyn, who I also believe has some things to say on this topic. So Professor Garway, if you're there.
Thank you so much. I think the challenges have been clearly articulated at this juncture. I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. And Geeta, Professor Yadav, do you have anything to add to this question?
Thank you, Kate. Thank you very much. Glad to be here today. From my point of view, as a user of AI, as a builder of algorithms in AI, you know, and being these tools can completely, you know, translate research or something about them. I think what we need to do is we need to adapt our traditional assessment metrics to capture the full value of the digital research space. We have very strong data value concerns right now. We also have very strong data security concerns globally. We need to manage data which comes in so many different formats. That is a big challenge. And we have to ensure the accuracy. You know, the answer to your question to the entire audience, I'm very concerned about fact-checking. You know, we need to have mechanisms in place for fact-checking the kind of data we're using in the digital research space, navigating this completely evolving new and constantly, you know, advancing tech research landscape. Now that DeepSeek is here, we need to be very, very aware of how we can navigate these evolving landscapes and maintain, and all the time maintain, ethical standards. So that's my 2 cents in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yadav. That's an incredibly important point. How do we deal with fact-checking in this landscape when effectively a lot of the information that's going into these systems is human opinion, perhaps wrong information? Dr. Hara, I can see you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I just also wanted to add on to that about, we are in a different space that is very challenging in how it's presenting itself to us. A few years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago, you only went by fact. And if facts said X, everybody took it as, well, not everybody, most people accepted that this is factual. These days, you have alternative facts. And that for every fact you present, somebody comes up with an alternative that looks just as good as the actual fact, even if it literally has just been made up. And so because of that, we cannot rely on these models sort of doing the fact-checking value-free. And we have to, and this is where the interdisciplinary issue comes in, that the humanities and technology need to come in, because a lot of this is about human behavior, human psychology, how people process information, and that we are in a space where saying this is fact or saying this is an output of science is not enough. You need to do a lot more than just saying this is factual and therefore take it. People these days are looking at who is saying it, what they're saying. They're not really concerned too much about, is it really factual and what means were used to come to this fact. There's this sort of a lot more attention paid to people's beliefs and faith and hunch, all of those things which previously were sort of consigned to the things that actually interfere with factual information. But actually these things are no longer seen like that. So yeah, just wanted to add that.
Thank you. There's some interesting additions as well in the chat here, mainly agreeing with Dr. Hara and the other panelists around the questions of equitable access and equality. Oh, some nice resources there as well. So anyone in the audience that would like to have a look at that. And addition here. Oopla. And I had it and I've lost it. I'm very sorry, my chat is jumping around. Talia. So this will lead to a greater digital divide and inequality, which will also affect growing research, which is also a very, very good point. Thank you for that. So we'll move on to the next question now in the interest of time. Our next question today is, what are the key challenges that need to be addressed for research assessment, given the digital transformation of research? And again, I will go to Thandiwe, Dr. Hara, to start us off on this question.
Before you go to the next question, can I raise something, Kidogo? Can I say something apart from interoperability that Dr. Hara have talked about in lining with technology? I would also add there is a challenge most likely in the law enforcement, because people do plagiarisms and there is also people running away with other people's data, but it has not been enforced. And especially I talked to one of the stakeholders from here in Kenya, and I realized that the government formed the commission for controlling the researchers, but most likely they are not more concerned on that. So that one should also be taken care of, because when it comes to research assessment, it is very, very important. How are we going to take care of the plagiarism and even other people taking the data? And also there has to be a periodic reviews that helps research tracking to be put on use, periodic reviews to help in research tracking so that it can help in tracking the researchers. And you realize also the research stakeholders are supposed to work as a team to avoid fragmentation. You find that the academia are on the other side, the industry and the policymakers. These people are not working at once. And then also under that one, we can also talk about research trading that involves all the institutions that cut across. You find that most likely the researchers are most likely left to the academia only, but it should also be a training that cut across the institutions so that everybody is at board. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Millicent. I'd just like to ask the audience if you have any other questions or comments, could you please put them in the chat just in the interest of time today? But that's well, several interesting points there actually. I know that in the UK, the UKRI are looking at building sort of policy frameworks or frameworks between policymakers and academia in order to benefit from that expertise. They've put a fair amount of funding into that. So I guess we'll see over coming years what the potential benefits of that are. But you've made some very, very good points there. Thank you. So moving on to question 2. Sorry, Dr. Hara. So I'll just repeat the question.
I think it's question 3. I think it's question 3 you're looking at.
Question 3 now, excuse me.
Yeah.
That's my confusion. I think the question 1 threw me out. So question 3. So are there any regional or cultural contexts that need to be taken into consideration when thinking about the evolution of international research governance frameworks? Dr. Hara, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. There are quite a number of things that need to be taken into account. And I think my colleague just before me started to cover some of those issues already. I did cover a bit about inequality in terms of from the researcher's point of view, but actually there's huge inequalities in terms of funding publication, in terms of authorship, in terms of, you know, how and who, like I said, gets to actually be published. But these issues actually do affect the governance frameworks that we actually need to take into account. And it's, you know, you can't, of course, you know, expect resource poor settings to be able to create or publish information and research at the same pace rate as resource-rich settings. But actually, to sort of in the simplest way possible, there's the issue of the dominance of certain epistemologies or certain ways of valuing information. And as you know, English and probably 1 or 2 other languages tend to be the dominant way in which people express themselves, in which people publish. But actually, language is not always just language. Language is also a vehicle for putting forward ways of thinking, how you come to certain conclusions, what you know, and how you get to know of it. All of that is usually carried in a language. And therefore, you find that actually when information is actually, or when research is published, even if it's published in Kenya, Zambia, Zimbabwe, actually the mode in which that information is published is still within the epistemology that is carried within the English language. But that also means that actually, without intending to, you may actually also be sidelining indigenous ways of looking at things, indigenous ways of publishing, indigenous ways of interpreting information. So governance systems need to be able to sort of consider how do you actually take into account the ways in which you extract information, the ways in which you make meaning to the information that you've just extracted, that actually also reflect the context in which the data and the research has been carried out. And yes, we do have open science, and like I said, that gives lots of opportunities in terms of democratizing information and research and getting more and more people to have access to it. But there's also actually challenges in terms of who actually owns that data. My colleague just sort of covered a bit about that. There's concern around colonial sort of relationships between data that's extracted, for example, in Africa, but published somewhere else, where sort of the African continent in some ways may be seen to have been a place where people went, collected data and published it in a different setting, but actually the beneficiaries of that data are still stuck in the same space, and whatever information is being extracted from them, whatever publication is coming out, maybe it's not even making that much of a difference to those societies or even to the researchers or the data collectors who actually got involved in that process. Concern around some sort of academics in the Global South probably just being reduced to data collectors but not being acknowledged. in that sense. And obviously there's also issue to do with the ethical standards. So if I actually want to do a research in the UK, I have to go through ethics and approval and all of those sorts of things. These are the ways in which this is done here. But actually different geographies, different spaces, different countries will have different standards. China will have its own ways of looking at that, you know, the US and the rest of the other places will have their own ways. But again, like I said, in places like Africa, where information and systems sometimes run in parallel, you will have a mini way of actually getting your data and your research approved that will look very much like what it looks like in the UK, but actually context. Do we take enough context of the geography and the people on which this information is being extracted from? Are we sort of looking at Western ways of sort of interpreting data or getting approval and consent? But do we really get genuine consent from the little old lady who didn't go to a Western education system? Do they really understand? And for me, it's not just about them understanding. It's really important because whatever information we're creating in terms of publications and stuff needs in the end to be able to make a difference to people. During the pandemic, we had really difficult, sort of a difficult patch of explaining to people about what the vaccine was, how it's been created, why it's been created so fast. Scientifically, there was lots of acceptable answers to those questions. But the reason that some societies found it really hard to accept and get themselves vaccinated is because they're largely very, very disconnected to the process of research. And so if you do research and then you just come back and say, well, but I did do this really well, I had my ethics approval and you know, this was really sound research, they don't really know what you're talking about because they don't understand, they haven't been engaged. And so it's really important that when we're looking at research governance frameworks, we need to consider the people on which we are doing research. We need to also have it in mind that actually the outputs in the end needs to be connected back to these same people, and that really helps people's acceptance of the outputs of research. And that's the whole point of why we do research. We don't do research just because we want to publish. We do research because we want to make a difference. And if you're doing research, for example, like the vaccine example I just gave you, there's no point in coming up with a vaccine if the majority of people are going to say, we don't know what this is, therefore we're not going to get ourselves vaccinated. But you've got something that can solve that problem, but you haven't done it in a way that people feel connected to it. And so obviously there's also other probably less sort of difficult ones to explain. There's differences in terms of the legal sort of differences between countries and how they see those. We have to make sure that all of that is taken into account and the geography in which all of that is taken into account. And therefore, regional bodies, you know, will need to actually be involved in international governance systems. We need to make sure that there's diverse leadership on international research governance committees. And that's where the diversity issue comes in, because even if I go to Africa, I do this research and I've got the local ethics committee to approve my research, but the local ethics committee has got processes that really aren't that very different from what I would get if I was in the UK. And then that comes over here, it gets approved as well, but you still haven't got that injection of the local person on which you did that research. So we need to actually have that into account. But actually, when you do have diverse committees on ethics and all that, all of these issues would then be brought up. And these are some of the reasons why it's really important to have diversity on research panels, research committees, because you have different people thinking about different things in a different way, things that would not naturally come across people who haven't been in that context. And so we also have to have flexible policies that will reflect all of these challenges and systems that are able to sort of reflect the challenges that are there in different geographies and contexts. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. There's some fantastic points there, and the chat box there has been very active while you've been speaking. So first of all, there's a fascinating debate over disinformation that seems to have broken out among the audience. So, if you're interested in that, then please have a look at that chat box there. So Giovanna says such an important point on culture and language. inviting all to know about the Helsinki initiative on multilingualism in scholarly communication. So that looks like quite an important resource there. Of course, language and culture is something that we really do need to take into consideration when we're thinking through these issues. And another intervention from Alexandra Telekova about the CARE principles, which are, of course, a fantastic framework for students to work with, for researchers to work with when working with Indigenous or kind of local communities. Geeta, I can see that you have your hand up. Professor Yadav, would you like to add something?
Thank you, Kate. To Tandy's very well described contexts in regional and local circles, I would like to add that we need to address the spatial-temporal digital divide. People in different geographies don't have access to the same kind of data. We have to address the digital gender divide also. There's such a huge, especially in the global south, I find that the gender divide and the digital gender divide are having huge gaps. And so we need to address the skills and capacities in digital research methods from these 2 points of view and must take these into consideration. One other thing I feel is that we must also have some protection built in against research misconduct that is originating in the digital cyberspace. We just had a conversation on the chat box. I'm trying to say, let's not go into the social side of it, but indeed, even for social data, social media, social networks, we are very far from incorporating any checks and balances for misconduct. There are 0 cyber justice courts, for example, even though the largest number of users are in India currently. And these are things that I think we need to start addressing or at least thinking about. That's all from my side for this question of yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask Professor Garvey as well, whether you have anything to add on this question.
Absolutely. I think the issue of worldviews or different worldviews, we need to have more of these conversations that we are having now. For example, the reason why many sub-Saharan African countries have not accepted the use of AI in research is because they are saying that the researchers will be doing nothing, literally. They just push things through AI and so on. But I don't think that is true, because traditionally when we were doing research, you would take your experimental design to the statistician who would look at it and perfect it for you. And then you would go to the field. You need some assistants who will be helping you in gathering that data, so you are not doing it yourself. And then afterwards, when you collect the data, you might want to go to the lab. You take it to a research technician in the lab who will analyze it for you, give you the data, and then you take it to the statistician who would analyze it for you, and then you write your paper and publish. So even traditionally, what we valued from you as the researcher are your ideas. So this is the same way that I view AI. But if you see many African universities, they are barring their researchers and students from using AI, although they are using it anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gawe. Again, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next question, but I would encourage the audience to read what's going on in the chat and get involved, because there's a really interesting debate going on over there as well. And I wish we had time to include everything, but we'll move on to the next question. So I'm going to put this question to Professor Yadav to start with. What can we do to integrate fairness in research assessment in the context of digital and AI-powered tools?
Thank you, Kate. In my opinion, as a user of existing transformer models, different kinds of GPT and BERT architectures, as well as a systems administrator at the National Institute of Plant Genome Research in India, I believe that the priority that we have in in the issue of integrating fairness is to keep the AI unbiased. And it is one thing to say and another altogether to incorporate. We often, in biomedical data sets, we say, oh, we can anonymize the data. How can you anonymize, when you've got, anonymizing is not enough, what I'm saying, for in the publications, if you're wanting to have an AI-based research assessment of your work, your paper, your reports, your theses, it is very difficult to anonymize because the way we write, the AI is easily able to recognize who's writing the paper, where they're coming from, and that is an inbuilt bias in the written language. So regardless of whether you remove the names of authors, race, gender, culture, many issues are in there. As a system administrator, I'm also concerned about providing a very secure AI ecosystem to the institution. And there, the best practices, at least to begin with, the best practices that I feel I'm currently using or employing or reading up more about is, firstly, protect the researchers, students, and staff that we have in the institute from AI misuse or at the hand of or being victims of AI misuse. Second, protect the data from third-party training data sets. Now, a lot of training, quite often you just get these ready-made apps and packages in the market that have done some training. You start using them. You need to absolutely protect your data. You can't fine-tune on models that you don't know what the training was done on. The second thing you can do to integrate fairness is to have proper guidelines. These guidelines, for an institution, for example, I'm at an organization, we are in India, about 250 people in the organization, including students, faculty. We are an academic research organization funded by the government of India. I absolutely insist upon logging, categorizing, and reporting the usage that you do in the digital space, even more so with AI. We need to understand how each individual is using AI in order to establish a strong governance framework. I realize that is a priority for this panel today, but even within the CoARA-ERIP, of which, within which I'm one of the co-chairs, many other co-chairs are currently in the audience today. We are all trying to establish strong AI governance frameworks, which will include oversight, accountability, monitoring, to help these AI systems remain fair and remain unbiased. We have to, above all, also follow compliance standards and things like, there are privacy regulations. There's the ISO 27001, there's the SOC, there are HIPAA, PCI DSS, many of these. So depending on which region you're in, you'll have to be very careful about being compliant with your national and regional data privacy regulations and standards. Does that answer your question, Kate? That's from my side.
Yes, that goes a long way to answering my question. I can see that Andre has their hand up. Would you like to just say a word or two? We've been kind of keeping it a general rule to just put questions or comments in the chat and try and get to them in order to keep within the time limits that we have today. The audience is a bit bigger than we expected, which is a wonderful thing. But Andre, if you'd like to just say a word or two.
I
and everybody else, please put your comments in the chat.
remark on AI, because I am directly working with large language models on the edge. And what I would say that, let's say, we should always, as some people on the chat were saying, about the techno-dystopia instead of techno-utopia, and according to an AI implementation, I would say that the compliance is not a term of AI. Because now the transformation models are always random. So once we have this, we cannot apply the regulations in the terms of our human understanding directly to the AI. Because when Professor Yadav were speaking about the compliance and the importance of the compliance of the regional and global data regulations, when it comes to NAI, the model, not in context of seeing the patterns, but in context of generating the random output, will represent you the patterns which actually no longer exist in your own language. And we should, at first, we should stay prepared for this. And this is, in my opinion, this is a reason of most cases of the misuse of an AI. Because once you, for example, the students are using AI, let's say in an improper way, for example, to detect the patterns in someone else's works and trying to, let's say, copy or let's say perform a non-authorized use of some data, then it's just, let's say, what we cannot predict from the existing data set. Then applying more and more regulations over the existing use cases of AI, actually, this is what will, in my opinion, bring us to the techno-dystopia. And way faster than the usage of AI itself, because as AI is random, then we should always keep in mind instead of applying more and more regulation. Otherwise, we will keep and end up something in like we have now in the European context of bureaucracy, when the bureaucracy is becoming actually more important than the actual use cases of some technologies, for example, the peer-to-peer technologies. I know this because I'm working also together with Francis on some peer-to-peer use cases, and this is quite important. Well, this is my remark. Sorry for spending more time than was expected, but I really wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you, Andre, for bringing in there the actual real life realities of AI into the discussion. And both viewpoints obviously are very valid. And actually there's very many similarities between the two. But it's good to remind ourselves of the real life limitations of AI as a tool. So quickly before we move on, since this question has a fair amount to do with fairness, then I would like to bring in our resident EDI experts, Candy, Dr. Hara, if you'd like to say a few words on this. Oh, I think that you are on mute at the moment.
Oh, sorry. This is question number 4, yeah? Can you hear me now?
And now I'm on mute, excuse me. I'll try that again. So what can we do to integrate fairness in research assessment in the context of digital and AI-powered tools?
Yeah, I think some of it is what Professor Gita has alluded to on the technical aspect of it, of what needs to be done to sort of be sure that the AI models are not being unfair to students, they're not being unfair to researchers, and that you know, certain people are not getting unfair advantage over others. But I do think that some of that cannot be addressed just by fiddling with the technology, because the technology is what it is. It is created by people. And so it will do what people have put in it based on how they've put it. And I don't think that we're going to ever get a perfect AI system, a perfect model. And that for me is where we need to intentionally reflect and intentionally sort of review, audit, check, be transparent, with the view to be picking out the point at which this unfairness is introduced. So no one out there is actually going out to create an unfair tool. I mean, there may be, but you know, largely people are going out to create tools that will enhance and support research and increase the benefits and all sorts of things. But because these things are actually coming from people who already have got their own lived experiences, they've got their own philosophies of life, their own worldviews, they will bring those things to the point of creating them. And so the first thing is for us to acknowledge that there will be inherent bias in these models, but we need to find out where the bias points are. We need to find out how we can address those bias points. We need to work out who is this thing disadvantaging. And that goes back to data. Who is this thing disadvantaging? Who is this thing benefiting? And in what ways? And what are the starting points that people that are using these systems, what are the differences and the disparities in that? So I sort of did cover some differences to do with access to funding, you know, and if you talk at an individual researcher's point of view, that has got a lot to do with who you are, what networks you have, who you're connected to, what university you've gone to, and all of those things. And then, you know, what journal you publish, all of those things repeatedly add on the advantage that you have. Once you have your baseline advantages, the advantages tend to accumulate and get, you know, better and better and better in terms of giving you that edge over others. What we need to do is to work out who is being left behind. And the who is being left behind, for me, it's not really about the who. Yes, the who is important, that everybody else has a fair chance. But for me, I would rather look at it as what is being left behind, because for me, it's the science that is being left behind that is so critical. If we end up with getting outputs only from certain profile of researcher, there is a whole lot of ideas that we're leaving behind. Never mind the people who are coming up with the ideas. It's the ideas themselves, these ideas that can actually change society for the better. If you think about medicine, the field of medicine, for example, about 50 years ago, you probably would have had 60, 70, probably in some countries, 90% of doctors being men. Can anybody in this day and age imagine that being the case now? And if you did imagine that to be the case, what would we be losing out for not having all of those women who are now practically in medicine? If we continued with that trend, would we be having as good doctors as we are now? Or would we have ended up taking men who weren't as good as, at the expense of leaving women who were better, and therefore having not as good medicine as we can have? So that's the point I'm trying to drive at, that it's not just the fact that this sometimes can be unfair on the researchers themselves. Yes, granted, but actually it's what society is losing out for not being fair. So I do think that in answer to your question, and in summary, we need to actually add in our reflection points, develop these systems, yes, acknowledge that these systems will have some inherent biases, but we need to go check where are the biases, who's being left behind, how can we bring them along, and their ideas. It's them and their ideas is what I would say. Thank you.
That's a very, very powerful point. Who or what is being left behind, really, as society and digitization advances at such a pace. Thank you very much. And I wish we could address all of the points here in the chat, but we do have to move on to the next question. So the next question here goes to Professor Gawe, and it's a question with 2 points. First of all, what are best practices for integrating digital competencies into research assessment processes to prepare graduates for future workplaces? And how can we cultivate the need for digital competencies for research assessment in the digital age of science and higher education? So with your university management hat on, Professor Gawe, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you very much for those questions. First of all, I will use my current university, the UM6P, as the case in point as I answer these questions. So at UM6P, which is my university, we are not just adapting to the digital transformation of research and research assessment. We are actually actively shaping it, as you will see when I go through the response to the questions. So here's what we are doing to make sure that we do this. In the first place, we have created a robust digital ecosystem at our university. This means that in terms of infrastructure, all our buildings are digitally optimized with robust connectivity. we have a green campus. It's actually a green city where our university is in. So you will not hear of issues about power cuts or anything like that. The campus is complete with green energy parks, green roofs, so that we have uninterrupted access to technology and resources. The second thing that we have in that ecosystem, in addition to the disciplinary units for the university, we also have specialized structures or units that cut across the university. For example, we have an international branch of the 1337 coding school that you will find in America, Europe, and other regions. And it's only existent here in Morocco. What happens at the coding school? We actually give access to any people with talent. So there are no entry requirements. As long as you can pass the challenges that you are given, you then can get into the coding school. And all the assessments are challenges where you build things, codes, and so on. And when you manage to build that, we have rewards, a reward system that is built in. In the first place, when you gain entrance, you do not pay any fees, accommodation, or anything. That's the first reward. We just want your digital outputs. We also have a story school where we make sure that with all these specialized structures, digital innovation, creation, and communication are prioritized. Thirdly, in that ecosystem, we have cutting-edge systems. So here we are talking about our collaboration with AI systems. We have a partnership with OpenAI, where all our faculty and our students have access to unlimited ChatGPT-4 access, and also for those who want to work on visualizations, we have unlimited access to Canva. So the issues of inequity are already dealt with here. So we also have learning management systems, collaborative research platforms to make sure that we enhance the digital fluency of our community. So you can see that as I'm answering this question, I know you asked me about preparing students, but in preparing students, it is important that we prepare the faculty as well. Because if you are talking about digital platforms or the digital space, it's constantly changing. So we want to make sure that we are all at the same pace. Then we have, in that ecosystem again, state-of-the-art hardware and software. So we have access to the latest hardware and software. So at the end of every 2 years, they take away our old in 2 years computers and whatever digital hardware and replace them. So we are always on the cutting edge. So that was the first thing that I talked about, the digital ecosystem. The next thing is partnership and training. So we offer extensive training, workshops, mentoring, and we also have, through our digital academy, specialized courses that we offer for free for all our university community. But who is teaching in those the digital academy? We are having gurus from Google, IBM, other top tier universities that are teaching our staff. So internationalization is already built into this platform. At the same time, I did talk about the openness that our university has to the use of AI, but we also have policies that are built in to make sure that everyone uses those platforms ethically and also, most importantly, confidentially. So for us to be able to do that, we make sure that the platform that is there, the ChatGPT Edu that we use, the moment that you are asking it, and in that prompt that you offer, there are some confidential issues, the platform will not give you any answer. It will refer you to the policy to say that these things that you are starting to ask are against our policy. So this is already built in. And then we also assess for our students, we assess their digital fluency, because digital fluency is important for us in addition to the digital literacy that we talked about when you talked about training. Our students, we want them to have digital fluency. So we are developing clear frameworks where we assess these digital competencies. What are they? They include data analysis competencies, visualization, and digital communication. So even in the trainings that we give, the non-technical part of the training involves communicating in a digital space. Everyone is trained to do that. So you can see that in our curriculum, we have actually integrated all these research activities and coursework to make sure that we then evaluate our students against their ability to develop and deploy, for example, machine learning models using, for example, tools like ChatGPT-4. What new models they come up with, we feed them back to OpenAI. So our university is not like subscribing to OpenAI in the partnership. We are actually providing also the OpenAI with our innovative models as a university. So I've already talked about curriculum transformation that we are doing and we continue to do, and also the rewards that we give for digital scholarship as well as teamwork. So if you look at how we assess our research, apart from all those new metrics that were being talked about, as well as the traditional metrics like citations and all, we also include collaborative research as part of our reward for promotion, as well as annual rewards. The best team, a collaborative team, will get an annual reward from the president of the institution. That is my answer maybe to the first part of your question. But as you can see, as I was answering the first part, I was already answering the second part on how we are cultivating digital competencies. So I can just go over again the keywords that I talked about. Digital infrastructure is important. Skills development is important. Digital fluency culture is important. And industry partnerships are important. I did talk about the partnerships that we have with Google and all the other ones, but locally, we have strong partnerships with the local industry. Our university is actually a private university that is owned by industry. So you can see that throughout our framework or our ecosystem, we have made sure that we are at the cutting edge of digital literacy and competence. I hope I have answered your question. I did want to show you something, if I may. I don't know whether I can be able to share my screen.
You should be able to.
Okay. All right. Can you see what I'm sharing?
Yes.
Okay, I've just put it on slideshow if I can. So you can see there, it's an advert that came out yesterday in the university community for all the students or the faculty who are interested in joining the third cohort of the Digital Academy to apply before the 9th of March. And what courses are being on offer? You can see there that we have full stack development, AI and machine learning, which is new this year. It wasn't in the first and second editions, blockchain, cybersecurity, and all the others. And I have already mentioned that in addition to this, we are also being trained on language courses, issues to do with other soft skills like entrepreneurship. And this training platform is designed for all to make sure that all individuals in the ecosystem get free online opportunities from tech giants like Google and all the other ones. And then you get certifications from CoARA and so on and so forth. This was just to showcase that this is not a joke. We are actually doing it at the university. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Gowe, for sharing with us the innovative work UM6P is doing in order to combat digital inequality within your institution. I'd like to ask Dr. Hara and Professor Yadav whether you have anything to add to that question.
No, I think she's said it well enough. Additions from me. Thank you.
I also think she stated well enough. I had 2 points to this. One is that and it's a follow-up, we need to stay updated with emerging technologies through training programs, workshops, and we need to absolutely embed digital literacy into research methodologies and assessment criteria. That's all.
Okay, so without further ado, we'll move on to the next question. How can we ensure accountability and transparency in the algorithms and data used for AI-driven research assessment? And I will direct that question to Professor Yadav, please.
Thank you, Kate. I think that's a great question. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Oh, thank God. I thought I glitched out. Yeah, thanks. So that's a great question. We must try and wrap our heads around the huge returns that currently are there with integrating transparency and accountability in an AI-driven research assessment. We can think about trust, improved research quality, greater societal and public acceptance of the research that we do if we are able to build in, currently a lot of researchers feel that assessment is a black box. I know that we feel the same way with AI, but at least, personally as an AI practitioner myself, I believe that you are more likely to trust an assessment process if you understand how it works and if you can access the information about the underlying algorithms and the data that go into assessing your work. And so therefore trustability or trust principles can be incorporated if we jointly come together and wish to do it. Transparency, of course, can help you address potential biases in the entire assessment process. And of course, we need to, just like in the chat box today, open the lines of communication. How are we using AI for research assessment? How can we foster greater acceptance of the technologies that are constantly evolving? So some of the strategies that I believe we can use to handle this is, first of all, transparency in data. Second of all, transparency in algorithms. When I say transparency in data, what I mean is you need to be able to clearly document how you collected a certain, whatever data you're collecting. What are the biases inherent in it? If it's biomedical data, if it's agricultural data, is it Is it human data? Is it social data? And how are you training the AI systems? Are their quality checks rigorous in place? Are you tracking the provenance of the data and so on? When I mention transparency in terms of algorithms, there, more often than not, what we find, at least in genomics and biodiversity informatics, two areas, conservation, of course, where we use AI currently, explainable AI techniques are better, I believe, than other methods because we have clear interpretations of how a certain classification is being done or a decision is being made by the AI. I also believe that documenting the models that we are using, explaining the architecture, providing weights and parameters. There was a question in the chat box about there was a conversation and a series of comments on ChatGPT. Of protein folding was finally broken or achieved during the pandemic with the AlphaFold. But if you look at if you look at the open version of AlphaFold, you can download the source code. However, you don't get the weights. If you don't get the weights used on the neural networks, how does that really make your model accountable? And how do you feel sure that even though it's an open source model and I'm using it, it'll still be okay, right? So that we have to establish mechanisms for independent experts to review and assess these algorithms. And these independent experts have got to be human. So there has to be a human oversight onto all of, at this stage in research for accountability. Also, there has to be, I said it earlier in the social context, but there has to be a mechanism where researchers have very clear pathways on how to challenge the outcomes of AI-based research assessment and how can they kind of get the explanation for the decision that was made for them. We've also got to think about the impact these assessments will have, and therefore regular feedback, regular interaction among each other, having this kind of a platform where we can talk about these issues. And at the end of everything, of course, the ethical considerations, but I believe my two colleagues on the panel are far more, I would say, in a better position to talk about the fairness and equity and ethical considerations in the, for handling algorithms and integrating transparency and accountability in the AI that we are using. Does that answer your question, Kate? That's from my side.
Yes, thank you. That gives me a lot clearer picture of what is going on. I've seen a question in the chat here that expands it a little bit, and I'm feeling quite similar to you, Giovanna, in this. Which AI tools are being used for responsible research assessment and by which actors? And I'm guessing, because Andre's put his hand up, that he might be wanting to respond to that.
Well, it's not about the response on the question, but I wanted also to place the remark on the research assessment. Because as the man who works with LLM, I would say that the first fact we should always keep in mind is how to load into the, let's say, not the assessment part, let's say the vector database of a given AI model, the previously successfully assessed data. Because to stay able with the LLM to assess the current research, we should put to it the examples, a huge set of examples for the previously assessed data. And this is what was not addressed before in this discussion, I can say. So the point is how it should be done, and how we are intending to do that. Because otherwise, even if our model is restrictive, for example, like BERT, and it will not hallucinate, it will just reproduce, then we should know from which we should reproduce. So the database of examples and the database of knowledge is the main point here, in my opinion. So maybe it would clarify some questions that would address today.
Thank you. So moving on now to the next question, because I'm very aware that we only have about 14 minutes left. Traditional research evaluation methods have focused on the metrics of journal publications, citations, and university rankings. How should assessment frameworks evolve to recognise value and impact of non-traditional contributions to science, research, and understanding of the world? I'm going to start with Evelyn, and then if all of our panelists could give a quick response so that we can add that last question in, because I think that is quite important. I'm also going to, before I pass this over to Professor Garway to answer, throw out again to our audience the question that we asked at the top of the hour. What would be the 2 key research policy and technological outputs that you would like to see in the digital research space? So what would be the 2 key research policy and technological outputs that you would like to see in the digital research space? If you could put your responses to that in the chat, we would be ever so grateful. So Professor Garway, please.
Thank you very much for the question. Again, using the case of my university, it is a polytechnic university. So everything that we do here, it's actually research by doing, or we can call it applied research. So we do prioritize research that addresses societal challenges, and we value work that informs policy and engages with communities. For example, here in Morocco, we have issues with water, lack of water, although we have a lot of saline water. So this is what our society wants. So you will find that most of our research will be applied in whatever area you are in, you will contribute to solving these problems. So when we then go to assess research, for example, for promotion of our faculty or for graduation of our students, you will find that our expert panels that we take from representing the whole world and peers, they will actually look at the research impact of the kind of research that you are doing, in addition to the traditional citations and so on. They will look at impact and how you have been able to come up with research that is relevant to the society and that addresses real world problems. So we also, in the digital space, have broadened the definition of research outputs to include issues like data sets, software, codes that I talked about earlier on, and other online engagement activities. For example, this kind of conversations that we are doing here, in engaging you, all of you, and listening to all what you are going to say, you are actually helping me and helping my institution to grow. So these kind of conversations or online engagements or even physical engagements for our faculty or students are actually valued and assessed. And then in terms of metrics, we also look at how other people are using your data, not only the publications that you come up with, but data reuse or the adoption of the software or applications. Like we have students from the agribusiness programs who are coming up every time with market-related applications that are useful and that can actually be commercialized through our StartGate, which we also have in our ecosystem. And then lastly, we actually champion open science practices. You know that when we talk about open publication, many people do not want it because most of the time you are asked to pay for the desk fees because you know your research will be accessed by everyone for free, so it's you who have to pay for it. And many people don't have access to funds, so they end up just publishing through platforms which are not open source or open research. But my university gives, for every researcher, you are given a grant or a fund annually, which you can use the way you want to make sure you publish open source, you engage whatever. If you want postdocs or if you want doctoral students, you can use it so that we can improve the level of the applied research that we are doing from the university. I again hope that I attempt to answer some of your questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That's great. And it sounds like you're doing some really, really interesting things in your institution, Professor Garvey. I'd like to very briefly open the floor to Professor Yadav and Dr. Hara to see if they have anything very, very quickly to add to that, because I would like to look at this final question.
No, thank you. No, thank you. Not so much.
Dr. Hara.
Just quick, really, I think I did cover some of it in my opening, which is really just, expand how we evaluate research and what matrices we use, as well as, what counts as research. And there's a particular point that I'm really, really sort of quite keen on, and this is the point of engagement with the public. How the public engages with research, I think, is really, really important. And we have to find a cleaner, easier, more objective way of actually taking that into account when we assess research, because at the end of the day, we can do all the brilliant research we want. If in the end the outputs don't engage with the public, we might as well not even bother. So I think public engagement, and I know it is in quite a lot of the way the UK looks at research, but I think we need to sort of make this a lot more global. People really need to sort of we need to put as much value on public engagement as we do in the rest of the other matrices.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Hara. So our final question is looking ahead, what steps should be taken at the policy, institution and technology levels to promote responsible research assessment in the digital space that maintains ethics and integrity while embracing the benefits of digital transformation? Professor Yadav.
Thank you, Kate. I believe that we can develop comprehensive ethical guidelines, above all, meaning establishing frameworks, informed consent, data privacy, responsible use of algorithms. We have discussed this today already, but we should also mandate through a funding agency at the policy level. Let's mandate impact assessments. I know the UK is doing it. I know the NSF is doing it. I know that Indian funding agencies are beginning to do it. I'm very closely involved with some of these, and I can make sure that we stick to the joint rule book that we come up with here and have proper data governance regulations. And we must also have at the policy level funding transparency, any kinds of potential conflicts of interest. There can be so many. And so these are things at the policy level that need to be addressed. At an institutional level, I'm working at one of the leading national institutions of academic research in India, but I've also worked at the University of Cambridge in the UK. I am, as you had mentioned earlier, I have started up, we've started our own collective global citizen science movement on climate action using AI over NLP. I think we need to have training for researchers. We've repeated it, but no harm in, to emphasize re-repeating. We have to mandatorily provide training programs at the institutional level on digital ethics, digital privacy, and responsible use of all sorts of emerging technologies. At my institution, I've been working for the last 19 years. This is the first time in 2024, last year, that we began training PhD scholars in digital ethics. It is a mandatory part of all teaching in India as per the new education policy. So I'm very positive about that. We have to also incentivize ethical research. At the Salzburg IDW in 2024, the International Data Week, Francis was there, the CoARA-ERIP entire team was there. The IDPC felt that incentivization is critical because ethics, tech is moving so much faster than the idea of ethics, and therefore incentivizing is critically important, engaging people, opening dialogues, and so on. Well, so that's the policy, that's the institution. What was your last? Technology, Kate. So technology, at the technology level, the interventions that we need to make absolutely deal with data anonymization, pseudo-anonymization. Francis has put in the chat box the point of data visitation, securing our data infrastructures, audit our algorithms, be open to sharing, visitation if not, full sharing and so on. Yeah. Above all, international collaboration. I think I have to say, Suchit, Kate, and the entire team at Exeter, as well as the EIC today, and we in CoARA-ERIP, I think we are fostering collaboration and international conversation between international research communities through such webinars. And I would just like to say at the end that I'm so glad you decided to begin this series, and that I'm part of the first webinar that you're doing. We have to develop consistency in responsible research across our national cultural barriers, subject barriers. Does that answer your question?
It absolutely does. And I can say that from, well, my perspective, and perhaps that of the colleagues at the EDI, although I don't want to talk for them, that kind of being invited by Francis, who's here with us today, to get involved with CoARA-ERIP activities just opened my eyes to an entirely new level of kind of what's going on, and something that we really do need to all be paying attention to and taking part in if we can. We will be sending out an email after this event with some links and activities that you can get involved with and things that you can find out more about. We're also, this is going to be one in a series of events, so up to 6 in total, I think, that we've planned. The next one is going to be in, in April, on Wednesday, the 23rd of April, where we'll be covering the topic of the impact of data and AI on research culture. So I have a feeling that this might appeal to everybody here today. Very, very quickly, the question that we asked at the beginning, what would be the 2 key research policy and technological outputs you might like to see in the digital research space? If I could put that to our panel today. Professor Yadav. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, Gita. Thank you.
Apologies. Thank you, Kate. Well, I've put my answer in the chat box, so I will not repeat it. I just want to say that on the top of my key tech output wish list is fact-checking mechanisms. Can we come together as the research community and build mechanisms for fact-checking into our research outputs? That's my only one, not 2, but that is my top wish list output from the digital space. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. And please, audience, if you'd like to put your ideas in the chat, because this will be fed back to the working group. Dr. Hara.
Yeah, I think Gita did sort of say one of the ones that I thought is actually quite important as well. So I'm going to say the other one. For me, I think this is the beginning of a conversation around standards in this space, and I think that it would be really good if at the end of this we come up with a standardized way. And when I say standardized, that means globally everybody sort of agrees that actually this is how we should assess research in a way that includes that is equitable and fair. So I'm sort of just looking at a standard way of agreeing that this is how we should use AI, because I think I've got a feeling at the moment every country, university, and whatever is doing it how they see fit. And I think standardizing it will be one way of moving forward.
Thank you, and a very good point. Professor Garway. Professor Garway, can you hear us?
Thank you. I'll pass this question.
Fair enough. If you have any ideas, then you're welcome to communicate them to us later. I'd really like to invite, I would like to summarize, and I'm aware that we're just past time, but Giovanna Lima from DORA has put some fantastic resources there and links to DORA's work in the chat. If you are still here, would you like to talk to us just 2-3 minutes on what you're doing, and I'd actually quite like to get you back in one of the upcoming events. But are you still with us, Giovanna?
I am.
Please, 2 minutes on what you're doing.
Well, as you know, DORA is a global organization. It started as a declaration, and in mid-2018, it became a global organization advocating for reforming research assessment. We do that by multiple means. So increasing awareness, developing resources, developing guidance, hosting a community of practice, both for funders and national initiatives. So it's a multifaceted approach, let's say, and we work with all the actors in the system. So we work with the publishing colleagues, we work with metrics providers, research performing institutions, and researchers themselves. So that's so it's a bit all-encompassing, which can be hard to follow, but at the same time very enriching in terms of developing this kind of standards that I'm hearing it's something that is needed as well. So in terms of guidance and clarity around things. So we provide clarity, for instance, about the responsible use of metrics and that sort of thing. So that's why for AI for us, of course, is a new topic as it is for everyone. So I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here and very curious to hear about what the working group will be producing. And count on us. CoARA, we have a close collaboration with CoARA. And yeah, so I don't know if that answers what we're specifically doing with AI. It's nothing specific, not yet anyway. But we do have a funders group. We are working on narrative CVs. We partner with Rory on their narrative CV project. So we are very much in the implementation side of reforming research assessment. So that's why my questions were also very specific in implementation. So what are people already doing, and how can we benefit research assessment by these different tools? And we curate, of course, a suite of resources in our website. We have Reformscape, which is one for research performing institutions. So if you are already using AI in your institution and you have a story to share with us, we will love to platform that as well, because then we can build some best practice around these issues. So I don't know if Professor Gita, for instance, is already using that sort of resource. Then we can share best practices early on, because what we are concerned about is that we're changing one type of system that's not working for us for another type of system that doesn't work for us. So it would be important for us to keep sharing good practices.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. And I would sincerely love to get you back for another one of these events. We'll kind of look as the teams have decided the topics, which one would be the most appropriate, but that would be wonderful. Thank you, Giovanna, for talking to us. So just to very briefly summarize, because we've covered quite a lot here, and it does seem that there are very, very many challenges in this space, things like access, visibility, bias, human design tools that could perpetuate inequalities. That was something that came up that I think panel and audience felt very strongly about. There's issues with facts, with these tools effectively just spewing out information that's fed into them. How do we define facts? How do we, keep the outputs as sort of factual as possible, especially when this is where people are getting more and more of their information these days. And all of the obviously digital divides, but also other issues like geographical and gender divides that Professor Yadav, alerted us to as well, which are equally as important. We talked about, and Dr. Hara very powerfully said, who or what is being left behind in this environment. And I think that that's something that we need to be very, very aware of as we continue with those discussions. And we've heard as well about Professor Galway's innovative ways to deal with issues of inequality and of access at UM6P in Morocco, where she is one of the senior staff in the institutions and helps manage the university. So what do we need to look at? Well, the things I've noted down that came up quite a lot were opening lines of communication, looking into subjects such as how are we using AI. We need to look at bias in data, research ethics integrated into training, which we've kind of heard is happening more and more. Professor Yadav, for example, is saying that this is something that is expanding more and more across India, where she's teaching at the moment. And we need to engage in more dialogue, opening dialogue, and talking about these issues in order to solve them, engaging people, engaging different stakeholders in order to together find the solutions to these really important questions, which is, you know, I hope something that we can play a small part in with this series of webinars, and with the institutions, the very important institutions who are along with us for the journey. So I'd like to say a massive, massive thank you to our wonderful panel, and to the audience that were able to join us today. And we very, very much look forward to seeing you again in April. So the next event is the 23rd of April, where we'll be covering the topic of the impact of data and AI on research culture. We'll tell you more about that, and we'll follow up with an email with more information, and also information on how you can join some of these wonderful initiatives and contribute to these initiatives yourself. We'll send that to all participants, to everyone who's registered for this webinar afterwards. And this recording will be made available online on the Ethical Data Initiative website, hopefully on the partner websites as well. We'll have a word about that and try and get them up there too. We'll also look at trying to make the chat available, because there's some fantastic discussion that went on there. So thank you all very much, and I'm sorry to keep you, but there was so much interesting information to cover. Thank you.